Just want to remind everybody why we do Practice Habits. Practice Habits is a program that we started to do now about a year and a half ago, and we do it every week almost, unless it's the week of Askers or Academy or perhaps a holiday falling on a Thursday. And we try to keep it Thursdays and we try to keep it around this time. But we do it to try to give back to some of the practices that mentored us over the years. You know, growing up in the Midwest, there was a lot of things we had to learn the hard way in ourselves. And so this is a way to try to get practices what they need without them having to necessarily recreate the wheel. So hopefully you find it helpful. The biggest compliment you could ever give us is to invite your colleagues and friends or to go to the Practice Habits website and watch past videos. There's little QR codes there where you can download certain information and learn more about what Practice Habits is up to. Part of which I'll bet we'll get into a little bit today because Amanda and her team use some of the training platform, though it's not directed, this talk isn't directed towards that. Listen, everybody, it's time now to
To
just
just
introduce you
introduce
to
you to
my
my
friend,
friend,
Amanda Smith. And Amanda and I, we've probably known each other now a couple years, 2.5 years
Mhm.
maybe, since you started at VIP. She grew up in the journalism world, found herself in the PR world for large kind of box store brands, found her way then into the human resources world where she was snapped up by VIP, and now has, I don't know the exact number, but nearly or just over 1,500 employees that call Vision Innovation Partners their work home. And it's a big job trying to get all these people aligned with the same company culture, same values professionally, and to get them all to sing from the same song sheet. Um, anyway, so we've talked about that a lot over the last couple of years, and I think that we can learn a lot from her on how to handle situational growth within a business, but also how you create culture at scale. And so, Amanda, thanks for joining
Joining
us.
us.
Maybe give us a little bit of background on where you've been and how you came to be in the ophthalmology world while I work on my audio.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for having me. You covered a lot of it pretty well. I thought I was going to be traveling the world covering news, and found that I liked the back end side of it, production, writing, the way things worked, etc., which led me into corporate America, and quickly led me into healthcare. So I've spent the majority of my corporate communications and HR career in healthcare. VIP is my first patient-facing healthcare organization for so almost 3.5 years now, which is pretty amazing to see. But the one thing that's true and constant, regardless of what type of work setting you're in, culture matters more than almost anything else. And frankly, I think probably matters even more than your strategy, because it's really what helps bring your strategy to life. So it's just interesting to be able to have a career that has moved across industries and see some of the commonalities and the things that really matter most to people, and really gets all of us fired up to show up to work every day. And a large piece of that is culture.
Now, give us a sense. You first join VIP, and
Mm-hmm.
you're kind of introduced to the entirety of the organization. This organization has, snapped up a bunch of practices that didn't know
Mm-hmm.
about each other. Some of them are several states away from one another. Some of them are right down the street from one another.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Talk about just the first foray into the category and trying to hold all this together.
Sure. Yeah. And honestly, part of me coming into VIP was specifically tied to culture and culture transformation, which speaks volumes to me to be able to be part of an organization that understands how important it is. How important culture is, and how it's a lever and for not just patient care, but overall the health of the company, the employee experience. So when I came into VIP in January of 2023, we were about 1,200-ish employees, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Maryland, and a location in DC. And most of our team was really concentrated in that Mid-Atlantic region. Since then, we've grown. We're just over 1,300 employees. We've added location in Delaware, but we've also expanded geographically with a remote call center and several other folks. So I think we're in about 18 states now. And so as you continue to scale and grow, that also plays a role in what your culture looks like and what you have to do to keep it alive and healthy, really. Because I think culture is always alive. It's a matter is the one that you want. And to your point, right, the interesting thing about VIP is you see VIP on my background. You see it when you're interacting with those of us who work at what we call our support center. But as a patient, you see the brand in which you're going into, whether it's one of our clinics or our surgery centers. And so we do have 26 brands on the clinic side and another 11 on the surgery center side. So that also, from an internal standpoint, can easily create some us and them because most of our employees relate to the brand in which they work every day. It's where they're showing up, it's what they see, it's what their patients experience. And VIP becomes something else, even though we're all one entity.
Well, so there's a couple of ways that we can go with that kind of as a backdrop, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot
Mm-hmm.
of times, and private equity is a good example, when an organization joins another one, the kind of mother brand supersedes everything, and that's what is customer facing.
Sure.
VIP
Mm-hmm.
has chosen
chosen
to
to
do
do
that
that
differently,
differently.
and
And
and in doing so, the local kind of reputation is kept whole. And meanwhile, VIP now has an unknown kind of position as it relates to the customer. How have you navigated that? And how do you translate the value of VIP to your practices? And
Mm-hmm.
what does the end user, the patient, end up experiencing with that?
Sure. I'll start with the patient. And what's been really important to us, right, before I came into VIP and continues to be true today is that the patients experience the brand in which they're going to, right? So what the provider they're going to see, and the brand associated with that provider, that's the patient experience. And that's been something that's been very important to us. So even when we do roll out things that are VIP wide, for example, we updated our mission, purpose, and values back in late 2023. That's important that it shows up, but it shows up in non-patient facing areas. It's important that, right, the scrubs our teams wear shows the brand of the clinic or surgery center in which the patient is going to be. So that's something that's been very important to us is how do we keep that local experience real for our patients. On the employee side, that's where it creates a little bit of the challenge because they're so rooted to that local brand, and it's that balance of what is ultimately we're trying to do across VIP, right? How do we do things that ultimately we want to make sure is helpful for all of our team members, create scalability, create easy to use systems, processes, etc., but understand there's always going to be a local flavor. And how do you find that balance? And I think that's something that's been a really important thing to understand is there's always local flavor. There's always a local flair. It's meaningful to the team members who work in each location, but it also matters to the patients who show up and finding the balance of doing something from a systematic perspective and allowing for a little bit of that nuance to show up.
I want to share with you an example that I've thought about since coming alongside VIP and cheering on my friends like you, and it's Starbucks. And there's recent articles, and I can't remember the sources, but there's a groundswell of people who don't want to patronize Starbucks because it's now a big brand, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, the customer service and the systems behind what makes Starbucks successful, you can't argue with it. It's a juggernaut. And
Yeah.
so Starbucks, being confident in their own brand, will open what looks like mom and pop coffee shops with all of the internal metrics, the internal machinery, all of the makings of the hardware that makes Starbucks great,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
they'll localize the brand. It'll be Amanda Smith's House of Coffee. And so they're selfless enough to say, we don't need our brand to be customer
Yeah.
forward for us to win on what we know is a great guest experience.
Mm-hmm.
I find that to be extremely powerful. And there's a little bit of that in what you're saying here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the end, right, when a location comes into being part of VIP, right, it's usually a family owned, family run business. Sometimes it's multi-generational. Right? There's things that have happened from, whether it's been 20 years or 100 in one instance, that's really meaningful to the community. And that's the power of what we're offering to our patients is that sense of community and being part of something that's rooted in where they are and where they're from and where
Mhm.
they live. And then if we have, new patients coming in to our clinics, right, they usually talk to somebody or they know somebody or they maybe moved back home and that's where they grew up and it's familiar and it's meaningful. And I think it creates also a lot of pride for the providers that are working in those brands as well as the employees who are showing up there. So that continuity of who they've always been is an important element of that then gets us to where are they going to go.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And listen, the Starbucks example doesn't end there because the other side of the coin is there are things that we're going to do because we're part of the bigger brand, even behind the
Absolutely.
scenes,
Yep.
that make us better than when we were just only Amanda Smith's House of Coffee.
Yeah,
And we're going
absolutely.
to write on each cup, right? We're going to let people customize their own coffee. So I want to just maybe, and this will be the part where I stop throwing you softballs and I ask you to think of some specific examples of
Sure.
tell me what are some things that are standards that you have across the board that maybe the local site wouldn't have normally had without
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, I'll use a specific example actually, and it's taken place since I've been part of VIP, and it was in motion just before I joined, which is recruiting. So prior to mid 2023, most of recruiting was decentralized. And
Mm,
so the practice manager, practice admin, the nurse manager at the surgery center, they were actively recruiting on their own. Maybe they had their, whatever platform they used to recruit, they were engaged, they had their own account, they did maybe newspaper ads and even in 2022, 2023, but they had a methodology to go and recruit. In the mid 2023, we fully centralized recruiting. We have a system that we use, so it's the same system for every single location. We actually have it set up so that you can apply by brand because that's really important. Is when we have somebody that's interested in joining the team, they're applying for a job that's tied to the brand where they're going to work, and it's true for all of our locations.
mm.
We have a small but mighty recruiting team that then supports that and then works with our local practice managers, nurse managers to make sure we're finding the right candidates and following an interview process. We standardize the interview process. So that sort of thing. And so in some ways we take a lot of that accountability off of them so that they could focus on one, running the clinic and making sure patient care is the best that it possibly can be. And two, they're engaging at the point that we have a list of candidates. They're interviewing them in person. They come into the clinic, do some shadowing. So you take some responsibility, accountability off of them to give them room to do other things that are more important for them to be doing on the daily basis. We pick up the things that we know how to do really well in support of them.
So it's like larger organizational standards of the basic recruitment and the basic application.
Mm-hmm.
The view is customized to the site, and then local value on them doing maybe a ride along in the practice or spending an afternoon to make
Absolutely.
sure everybody. And that's I think one of the things we're talking
Yep.
about with how we promoted this webinar is how do you make sure you don't leave anybody behind?
Mm-hmm.
Give the small companies
Yep.
the big company assets without losing some of that local flair, and it's
Yep.
difficult.
It absolutely is difficult. It was not easy. It was not easy to centralize. Think about you've been running a practice for 15 years. You have a way to do it. It works. You know how to get the right candidates, and all of a sudden you have to give that up to somebody that you haven't met in person yet, maybe that hasn't worked in your clinic, that might still be learning ophthalmology. That's a really, really hard thing for folks to do, and we felt it. And then one of the most important things is you're having the conversations, you're engaging with managers to understand what their concerns are, you're addressing those concerns. If you're missing the mark, you're going back to them, say, what am I missing? Tell me more,
Mm.
help me, right? I want to do great by you, so give me more data so that I can truly make it easy, because that's the point, is us helping make their day-to-day easier. And if in the end we're not, we have to be open to that feedback. We have to go ask the questions, and then we have to learn how to pivot our process to actually be doing the things that make their day better, because that's the goal.
What are some of the things that are centralized?
Sure. So we on the HR side, right? HR system, payroll, time off, handbook, all of those core HR things, recruiting. We have a level of our onboarding is centralized, but there's a level that's also local. So that's a good example of things that you have standardized at one level, and then you add in the line for the local flair. Small example there is in our smaller clinics many of our employees are cross-trained and do multiple different jobs, but in our larger ones, that it's not set up that way. So we have to make sure that we've set up our processes to be able to support that. Our EHR, our front office system. So from a patient perspective, any system that they engage with or we need to use to engage in their care, those are all standardized across VIP as well. So that also includes things like RCM. We are currently going through creating a centralized call center. So that's some calls, a majority of calls going through a centralized call center, but there's still always going to be that level of need in the clinic. Emergency calls, for example, you want going to the local clinic and the provider being able to respond in the right time and right way, or et cetera. Again, that's that balance of what can we do from a centralized perspective that again is supporting the clinics,
Mm.
helping with their day to day, maybe bringing a lot of that call volume off of them so that the calls they are getting are relevant, and not taking away perhaps by the patients that are right there in front of them.
There's a book that I'm passionate about called The Experience Economy. And
Mm-hmm.
it starts with, there's a progression of economic value. And where
Mm-hmm.
value is the highest, you get there through customization. And where value is the lowest, meaning it's still of value, but you can't charge as much because it's relatively similar across the board. That's when we drive things down to marginal costs. And the way you get up the progression of economic value, like I mentioned, is through customization. Well, in
Mm-hmm.
healthcare, everybody believes that we're 100% customized. And yet, the business model is that if we're going to grow and we're going to
Yeah.
scale, the bottom side of that graph is that every time you try to make things similar, you commoditize it
Yeah.
and it falls back down the ladder. And so, while the demand is wanting to be customized, the standard of care is trying to be commoditized. And that tension is right where you are, right? How do we
Mm-hmm.
make that really valuable or for the end user, which in your case is the
Sure.
practice and the patient? And how do
Mm-hmm.
we scale in such a way that's not going to erode that customized feel?
Yeah.
So that's a unique challenge.
It is. It is. And
Some might even
I
call it a
wish,
cluster.
right? I wish I could say we cracked the code on all of it and we know
Yeah.
all the answers, but no one knows all the answers, and that's you to be comfortable to not knowing all the answers. Um, where I think it matters the most, and where you really have to pay attention is it always goes back to the patient, right? And what's that patient experience, and how do we make sure that we are setting up our again clinics and ASCs both in a way that creates the optimal patient experience.
Hmm.
And some of those things are the ones that we shouldn't commoditize.
Yeah.
Other
Yeah.
things, such as how we process what EHR we're using or how we process billing, right, that can be centralized because there's a patient element, of course, to billing, but it's not front and center while you're in a clinic face to face with a patient care associate, with a technician, with a provider. That's what you really need to figure out. How do you make sure that local flair shows up? How do you make sure that that's the top of that experience economy and that experience is the best that it possibly could be? And
You
what
know,
other
I've
noise is around that? How do you pull that out
yeah.
and do it somewhere else or broader or differently?
The I want to actually get to some questions that I know you've prepared for, which is just some of the basic ones, like,
Mm-hmm.
in an organization like yours, how do you create a sticky or scalable company culture? It's big, wide open
Absolutely.
question, but what are some of the things you do tactically?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost, you have to understand what it actually is. And what it actually is not what you think it is. Right? So, frankly, what's the fly on the wall? if you went to every single location, every single department, what are you hearing if you're the fly on your wall? Because that's your actual culture. That's what you really have to get to if you to understand then what needs to change. So where do we want to be? So you have to do some aspirational work. Where do you want to be? Where are you today? That gives you then a little bit of a roadmap to say these are the things we need to do to make that aspirational culture the actual culture that exists. That's listening sessions. It's engagement surveys. There's a variety of ways to get to that type of data, but I think it's really important to understand what it is because I've yet to go to a place where I think what the culture is actually what is alive and well. What are patients hearing, right? That sort of thing. That's an important, I think that's probably the most important thing to do as you're thinking about driving any culture change. Because if you don't understand what it is, you really don't know then all the things that you need to do to change it. The other piece is, I think about, I'll use an example of when we launched our updated mission, purpose, and values, is you have to make it tangible. And so while we do have posters on the walls in our team member break rooms, for example, it's more than that. It shows up in our town halls. It shows up on our intranet. It shows up in annual awards that we do at our provider meeting. It shows up in contests that we have across the organization. It shows up in our performance reviews, right? So you have to make it real. I was thinking about this just the other day, and it's springtime, and where I lived, it just snowed, and we actually just put some plants in the ground. So, but think about it like it's similar to gardening. And if you're not a gardener, just keeping your lawn alive, or if you live in a desert area, keeping the weeds out. You have to seed it, you have to water it, you've got to prune it, you have to be intentional about what you're doing. Um,
Even if you don't see it happening, even if you
Absolutely.
don't see the immediate growth, that's the hardest part for me.
I would agree because I think in this world of we want these instant results and we could pick up our phone and have things ready, we want it to be changed tomorrow. And culture isn't a light switch. Culture change is 3 to 5 years of very intentional work, and it can easily go backwards on you. It's
Hmm.
similar when I think about when you go to build trust with somebody. One little saying something the wrong way, one little instance could change that trust immediately. Culture is very, very similar. And so you have to recognize it's going to be a little bit of a roller coaster. Your goal is to make it more like this as it goes up. But there are going to be dips, and be okay and be comfortable with those dips, and then be purposeful in what you're going to go do because you've hit some of those dips. In larger organizations, it's also going to show up a little bit differently because there's local culture, right? So you can
Mhm.
say organizationally wide, this is who we aspire to be, or this is who we are. But you have to respect the fact that it's going to show up a little bit differently, say in a clinic in Texas than it would in a clinic in South Dakota than it would in a clinic in Virginia, because there's just local culture. So you have to also be okay with that and understand how it shows up locally, that it connects in and it ties back to overall who we are as an organization. I think that's also really important. And the other piece I'd say is as you go to build it, especially in growth mode, is the culture that you have if you're an organization, say, of 10 or 15 people, and so many companies just like, this is our way and we want to hold on to it and we don't want this culture to change. If you become a company of 50, it has changed and it needs to change because how you interact as a company of 10 is very different than 50, than 100, than 200, whatever that scale may look like. Holding on to what was actually will do more harm to your culture than learning how to grow and evolve the culture as your team and company grows.
Yeah, that's really valuable. The 10 to 50. They say it happens again when you break 100.
Hmm.
Once you break 100, your organization, without you even doing anything, breaks itself into two. It's almost like what do they call that? Mitosis.
Hmm.
So because you can only have so many units of culture before it kind of creates their own subcultures, and I find
Hmm.
that fascinating. Well, what's an example of something that's a real threat to your culture? Something that's just intolerant, not tolerated.
I think I think I used to work for at a company where the CEO called it it's the electric fence, right? So things along the lines of integrity, things along the
Mm.
lines of our values, um, definitely patient care and experience. And if you're not handling our patients in the right way, or using the wrong words, or having disagreements in front of patients, that sort of thing, again, patient experience, employee experience. I think one thing that really impacts culture, really truly ties also to turnover. And as you bring new team members in, and how are you, I think the word used to always be assimilation. And I don't think that's quite the right thing, because that means like I want to make you me. And that's not the point, right? It's more of integrating and building them in, and right, accepting them for who they are and what they bring into the culture. That becomes a really important piece. So the more turnover you have, the more work, frankly, you have to do relative to culture. So I think that's a big one as well. Um, and then I think the other piece is just, frankly, local dynamics and geopolitical dynamics. It plays a role in the workplace, and you just have to be clear on how you manage through that. It's a sticky one, but it can impact culture, and I've
Mm.
seen it over the course of the 20 years I've been doing this.
I remember from my days in managing the sites in Vance Thompson Vision, one of the things that was an unforgivable sin is the four words, "That's not my job."
One of my
It's like
least favorite sayings.
that was just like just
Yeah,
and we said it, in interviews.
yeah,
Like that's a really quick way to run to the bottom
yeah.
of the group. And the other thing I'll just say is I think the mentality, anytime there is turnover, or anytime you have an opportunity to bring somebody
Hmm.
in, and by the way, I'm guilty of this because when you're replacing somebody, you're so desperate to find somebody that you
Absolutely.
you might not think it through. And I know I'm guilty of this, you know,
Absolutely. We all are. Yep.
but do they raise the average? Not do they assimilate, but like if we were to average everybody,
Hmm.
will the addition of them, when
Yeah.
we recalculate, bring everybody a little bit up, or neutral, or take it
Yeah.
down? And we should always be trying to make sure that it's a step up, or
Always raise
or
the bar.
or we should wait. And that's a
Hmm.
really it's interesting. I'm having to revisit some of these things
Yeah.
in my own work just because I find myself tripping over some of the things I've learned a long time ago, being in
Hmm.
a different business environment.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but they
It's on that one. It's as you're interviewing and you're recruiting, thinking about aptitude and attitude, because a lot of skills are teachable, and attitude and aptitude aren't. So if you see somebody that, especially, I think in our world, most of our candidates don't come with experience. We're not, we do hire some that have been an ophthalmic tech before, but it doesn't happen a lot. It's not a skill set that's out in the world in large major numbers, and they're out in the market. But you're looking for that aptitude, and right, do we think they can learn it, and we think they can then learn describing, and then can they learn do they have the ability to continue to learn? I think is something that we often look for the perfect resume. And how do we start to look for those elements that might not show up in the resume, but they show up in the conversation? They show up when they're shadowing, they're asking the kinds of questions that you're like, that's somebody that I think we would want on our team. I
Yeah.
think that's a really important element, is just specifically on the turnover piece as we think about bringing new people in.
I want to just encourage everybody on the line to unmute, and you can ask questions now because we're at the time where we're going to be rounding the corner on our conversation with Amanda. But you've had the opportunity to come and check my work because I got a big mouth, and I like to talk a lot about the stuff that we do. We did at Vance Thompson Vision, but you've had a chance to come, and others
Hmm.
on this call have had a chance to come and breathe the same air. And in many ways, the work that you and I did, it's not so dissimilar. It's
Yeah, I
it's
agree.
hard, but maybe share a little bit about the what the similarities are in trying to create that company culture.
Yeah, I think it has to be real from the top as it is at the frontline level. Right?
Mm.
If you want your culture to, right, you define it and you say this is what I want it to be, and you're not living it. then it's not going to be what you want. So your leadership team, your executives, whatever that top of your organization looks like, has to fully believe in it, and most importantly, live it. Because employees, they model their leaders. They model their direct supervisor, their direct manager, their next in line. They model what we are doing and what we are showing. So if you don't believe in it, you've got to, if you're part of creating it, then you have to make sure it's something that all of your, whomever your team is that you're working with, can believes in and rallies behind, that it's actually doable. So as we were going through the work tied to updating our mission, purpose, and values, we had a team across VIP, that worked on it as a project. We did focus groups, we did some surveys, we were out and about in a variety of clinics and locations to feed into what that is. So you have to really, it's got to be something that's actually real and tangible and you believe in. You need to embed it into processes and systems, have the conversations, and then as you know, as the years progress, one, know that it's going to morph and be okay with that. Right now, we have 8 values. Will we still have those same 8 2 3 4 years from now? Probably not, because life evolves, things change, and sometimes it'll get so rooted, it's another set because those are already so embedded that you focus it on something different, perhaps. It has to be true at the top, and then you have to make sure you're putting in ways to make it real at entry level, and then it all comes together in between.
That's something that I have to, this has been helpful for me because I am reminded how important it is to the same things that I want to see out of the team are things that I model myself. And I don't know if we're all like this, but there's quite a distance sometimes when I do some self-reflection and
Mm-hmm.
my expectations um, right here versus out there. And
Yeah.
so I think that's a good reminder. I want to just, if you've got any questions for Amanda, just unmute, maybe even turn your camera on so we can hear it. In the meantime, and you can totally interrupt me. I want to just leave this quote with you, Amanda. This is from, a lot of people attribute this to St. Augustine, and they do so incorrectly. It's from Rupert Meldenius. But this was one of the mantras as Vance Thompson vision began to scale. Here goes. In essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. In all things, charity,
Love it.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Things that are like patient related, patient care, in our case, pricing parity, those things. In essentials,
Mm-hmm.
absolute unity. And the things that aren't that way, how we're going to say things in a certain marketplace, how we might market a certain
Yep.
thing, how we might
Mm-hmm.
offerings we might have, liberty. And in all things, right? On all things charity. We're gonna approach them in a way that
Yeah.
we don't know everything and that we can learn something from somebody else. Question
Yep.
came in from Cade, who thankfully is muted from corporate. Um, just kidding, Cade. The question is, maybe you can read it on your end.
Well,
Yeah.
you wouldn't stop talking, so I had to go to the message chat. And so it's the only way to get Amanda a question.
Thank you. That and passenger pigeon. Ask your question, Cade.
You just have a lot of stakeholders, so I'm just curious that
Absolutely.
like if you have investors, you have the VIP board, you have the central leadership team, you have the
Yeah.
practice leadership, you have doctors, and so that's a lot of people to like push into like one
Yep.
direction. So I'm just
Yep.
curious how you approach that.
Yes, that is, in some ways you could say it's a little bit of a dance because the kinds of conversations that I would be having with one of our Griffin partners compared to a board member compared to a practice manager, it's very different. I think one of the things, and uh, I've talked with, even just thinking about HR and our collective HR team here, and I've got a couple of them on the call today. Thank you. Is first and foremost, you're never going to hide truth, you're never going to lie, right? That's just from my perspective, that's just such an important thing. It goes back to some of those electric fence things. um but the message is going to be very different perhaps when you're going into a board meeting than when you're at the practice level. Because at the practice level, think about, honestly, I'd take it all the way back to the basics of employee engagement. The basics of employee engagement is what's in it for me. That's the baseline of employee engagement. And that's kind of the lens I think you often have to take. So say we have an initiative that we're going to go roll out across all of VIP. At the board perspective, you're talking about the strategic initiative, the impact that you think it's going to have on patients, of course, the impact that it would then have on the business. And at the practice level, you're going to be talking about that initiative as what does it mean for that brand and how can I help you bring this to life? What do you need from me? What do you need from maybe another team member, another function across VIP? If we're rolling it out location by location, how do we get you connected to somebody else that's already been through it that can give you, hey, here's what worked and here's where it did not work for me, so watch out for these things. So I think you really think about it. I'm in your shoes, right? I'm getting ready to deliver you a message. What do you need to hear? What's going to resonate with you? What's actionable? So I need to make sure I'm telling you these are the actions. What do I need? What do I need from you, and vice versa? And I think you just think about that from each level of the organization. Sometimes it's even with third parties that you're working with to really understand. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to put my board member hat on. I'm going to put my nurse manager hat on, and that's how I'm going to frame that conversation. And in some cases, it's an inform, and in some cases, it's a like I need a back and forth to get some input from you. That's an important piece of it. And from my perspective, it's and how can we help? I firmly believe in my job. I see patients every day. I'm never going to see a patient, but I see patients through our people. So if I can make the everyday better, that's my goal. And we've made progress, and there's always going to be more work to do. Um, but I think it's you figure out what makes sense for the audience, and even what do they already know, because in some of these audience groups you might have to go a little bit deeper because they don't know enough yet, and other ones you can talk high level. I think the other piece you in the comment here, right, there are a lot of different people to keep happy and pulling in one direction. I think the directional piece is accurate, and how do we figure out how to keep people moving, as aligned as possible, or if it's a rollout over locations and time, um, keep them right, keep it rolling well, and keep the people that it has it coming and informed of what's coming their way and things that we've learned along the way. The other piece on how do you keep them happy? I think the unfortunate reality is you can't, especially in an organization of our size, you're not going to make everybody happy. So what is it that you can do that really makes sense for the most? And then when there is that little bit of a difference going on, something's not quite right, you dig into that team, that local location, to understand what's really happening and what we can do to maybe make it better. But from an HR leader standpoint, that's a really tough thing to go do.
Hmm. Really good answer. And I love, by the way, the quote. I'm not going to make you a t-shirt, but if you had one, it would be this. I see patients every day because I see patients through our people. Great.
Absolutely.
Great, 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 great,
Yeah.
great comment for somebody in your role. Listen, with all of those very hard-hitting and controversial questions, Kate, we're going to bring our conversation to a little bit of a close here. Amanda, thank you for
My
joining us.
pleasure.
We
Yeah,
try to keep these sessions under 45 minutes, and you certainly kept us interested. We hope to have you back sometime to hear
absolutely.
how the growth is happening. And as you're adding practices and bringing more into the fold, I'm sure you'll learn lots along the way. Everybody, I want to let you know also, and this will be a good one for your team also, Amanda, but next week we're going to have the Chief Operating Officer for Vance Thompson Vision. We've had one of the executives before, the head of marketing and practice development, Melissa Palmer, but next week we'll have Wade Opland, whose job right before joining Vance Thompson Vision was the head of all retail operations for American Girl Doll.
Yeah,
And
he's
so that's
fascinating.
quite a story. What does American
Hmm.
Girl Doll have to do with ophthalmology? And the answer is, more than you'd think. And so I think it's going to be a riveting conversation. Tune back in next week for that. Amanda and everybody at VIP, thanks for your help. We learn a lot from you. Thanks for holding the line on quality care out there on the East
Absolutely.
Coast.
That's what we're here for.
Have a great
Thank you.
session. Have a
Thanks,
great
Matt.
day,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Amanda.